Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Stranded Publishing. Today we are discussing the title, as you can see ahead. Uh, oh, that's a fucking mouthful. Today is going to be a tabletop design discussion, very similar to my Chronicles of Darkness genius design on Reward Loop video. But rather than discuss one game, we're gonna discuss four and how they bother me in varying ways. So, I suppose if, rather than jump into it, just to give a little background onto what the fuck inspired me to do this nightmare of a title. Recently, due to the consequences of my coworkers' actions, as well as a fellow player in a game I'm in, talking to me about some stuff, I was tricked into picking up Mage the Ascension 20th edition. Or sorry, 20th anniversary edition. For those of you unfamiliar with Mage the Ascension, Mage the Ascension is a game about being a all-powerful reality bender, well, maybe not all-powerful, but very powerful reality bender, going through life and trying to live as a reality bender in a world where reality benders are constantly at war with each other, and all trying to achieve the same nebulous goal as Ascension. Reading through the lore of this book, which is itself a fairly metaphysically dense book to consume, as well as just frankly really interesting. Uh, there was a lot of conversation about the nature of something called Ascension and an enemy faction of mages known as Marauders. Marauders are mages who have fundamentally gone too crazy to really function anymore after incurring the wrath of reality for always bending it. And as a result of this fact, they have effectively become a reality bubble of their own power. There's a lot more we're going to get into here, but like this idea fascinated me because it seemed almost very similar to one of the potential many definitions of this nebulous ascension mages are trying to achieve, which caused me to go on a small conspiracy theory filled rant about how actually I think that Marauders are the most close to Ascension, and multiple people familiar with the game told me that's insane because Marauders suck and also it's explicitly a fail state of a character. And I wouldn't ever want to be in a game where I had to retire my character to succeed. On the other hand, I think retiring your character because they succeeded is a natural game state to achieve, but for long-term stories in role-playing games, I could absolutely see why achieving the goal you've been striving for by failing would not be a satisfying end. But I did some more reading and found out some more ways about how maraudership works, and effectively, yeah, it's just an end state for failing, something that could be considered quote-unquote integrity, which we're going to get into. It is from an integrity system. If you fail it and become a marauder, your character becomes GM controlled and dies. Effectively. They don't actually die, although someone's probably going to try and kill you if you're a marauder in Mage. But enough about Mage, for now. This got me thinking about a couple of other games I've played. Like I said, we're talking about four, and some of the things I've learned about them over my time playing them, and just some of my experience playing them. The main game that is really getting me riled up in this particular thing, although Mage is mostly at fault, is a game called Changeling the Lost. For those also unfamiliar with Changeling, there are two Changeling games that you're going to find similar to Mage games. One is Changeling the Dreaming, which we won't be discussing because I didn't know jack shit all about it, and one of them is Changeling the Lost, which we will be discussing at length. Changeling the Lost, from a premise-wise examination, you are playing someone who is the victim of supernatural abuse to the nth degree. You are a person who was whisked away to the Fey realms and made into something fundamentally inhuman and made to bend to the whims of a Fey, which are temperamental and frankly abusive, and to some extent just fundamentally because they are inhuman, they don't even recognize what they're doing to you. You escaped, but you made a deal. And as a result of that, the Fae want you back, and you have to try and live out your life while not going crazy, as you potentially lose your ability to divide the line between reality and your own thoughts. Which is a pretty dark bit of subject matter compared to, yeah, we're just trying to do something nebulous like make all humanity reality benders or forcibly like transcend the mortal coil or all of reality or something. Clear lines of interaction there. But the main thing about Changeling, other than the fact that I'm currently playing it right now, is that Changeling has an integrity system, because the game line it comes from, Chronicles of Darkness, which is kind of just legally distinct World of Darkness, but is also kind of World of Darkness, but not. Don't worry about it. There's a lot of stuff there that is irrelevant to today's discussion. The thing about Changeling's integrity system is that it is fundamentally, compared to most of the integrity systems that I've experienced in the Chronicles of Darkness game line, utterly unique. Because most integrity systems in Chronicles of Darkness are much like becoming a Marauder in Mage, a fail state. You hit 0 integrity and you become a GM-controlled character whose purpose is to then serve as an antagonist. They cannot be saved, they cannot be brought back, they are to be killed or written out of the story, one way or the other. And this is very common in Vampire, the Requiem, not Masquerade, and also is very common in just Mortals. Mortals, you hit low integrity, or 0 integrity, and you are either killed or made into a GM-controlled character. I believe this is also the case in Hunter the Vigil. And I know it's not true for all Chronicles of Darkness game lines, but it is a very common thread. 0 integrity means effective character death. Roll a new character, you're done. Changeling doesn't do that. Changeling has 2 0 integrity states. The integrity in Changeling is called Clarity, and it is a damage track. You can suffer minor clarity damage or severe clarity damage. Minor clarity damage nets you into a coma. Severe clarity damage also nets you into a coma, and if you fill your track, but a worse coma, I should say, and if your track of clarity is entirely filled with severe clarity damage, you fall into a deep sleep and die. So there is ultimately a, yeah, you fucked up good permanent fail state there. I'm not going to deny that. But the 2 coma states before that are something that other games in this game line don't do. If you have a minor clarity damage coma, you can actually get yourself out with, if basically just some good rolls and some role playing. It's a whole thing. It can be a lot of fun. Comas are very weird and interact with an almost entirely unique rule set to Changeling the Dreaming. Not truly unique, but, you know, something that they are uniquely suited to. And then a severe clarity damage coma, which happens when, not when your clarity track is full of severe damage, but when you incur severe clarity damage, and then you go into a coma. That's a severe clarity coma. And in that case, you need your allies to go into your dreams, prove to you that you were dreaming, so that you can wake back up and be out in the real world. And there's a lot of mechanics in this. It's a whole adventure thing. It typically interrupts whatever the fuck you're doing at the moment. But like I said, comas can be a lot of fun and full of a lot of interesting things, and are themselves potentially very life-changing adventures for everyone involved. And that's very interesting, because instead of reaching 0 integrity and fuck you, you're done. I mean, sure, they have that state. You do eventually die if you don't tend to your clarity for, too long. You instead actually get to have a character who gets to go on a personal journey where they may learn something about themselves, or any of the people who are helping them they may learn about, or the people who are helping them may learn something about themselves or their ally, and this can potentially heavily change dynamics and the people involved in them. You walk to the edge of the abyss, gaze in, and are given an opportunity to step back, and this is a significant and meaningful character moment. Now, this interaction with the gameplay where you actually are still playing your character while in a coma made me also think of our fourth game today, because we're doing Vampire the Requiem, Mage the Ascension, Changeling the Lost, and then coming out of left field and leaving the Of Darkness general setting aside, except not really. If you read a certain magazine back in like the 90s, we have fucking Cyberpunk. Let's go. Yeah, finally branching out into something normal. I love Cyberpunk RED. What a fucking game system. One of the most games of all time. Style over substance bleeds through in all of the design of Cyberpunk, but Cyberpunk RED does do something cool with humanity. And that's fucking therapy. For those unfamiliar with Cyberpunk RED, but unsurprising if you've read the title of the video, it has an integrity system called Humanity. This is a name unfortunately shared with Vampire the Requiem, so I'll specify Cyberpunk Humanity or Vampire Humanity when and if we're discussing this. The way that humanity works in Cyberpunk RED is that it is a value of a maximum of 80 and a minimum of 0, effectively. And you are suffering penalties to the stat it's tied to, empathy, until you hit 0, at which point you suffer not necessarily character retirement, but something similar. You go into a state called cyberpsychosis, which, for those familiar with some cyberpunk media, you'll think means you immediately become a badass mass murderer who's out to go on the killing spree, causing as much damage as possible. Not technically true in the game, or in the tabletop. Cyberpsychosis is actually much more subtle, and the experiences you can have with it are varied and heavily based on who you are. You don't lose your intelligence, you just become disconnected from the concept of humanity to the point where you see people as interchangeable parts because you've disassociated yourself from your own humanity by upgrading too much. Anyways, not to get into the philosophy, this isn't me yelling about the philosophy of cyberpsychosis and cyberpunk, but basically, when you hit 0 humanity, you are now a GM-controlled character. Normally that would mean time to roll up a new character. But if your character walks off into the street and your allies are able to, through their own capacity for empathy, figure out what the fuck happened to you, believe it or not, it's actually possible to save a player from cyberpsychosis, violent or not. You see, if someone can be captured and then brought into therapy, or just brought into a medic's bay or a hospital, you can either rip out the cyber, which does refund humanity, or give them therapy, restoring the amount of humanity they have up into a certain maximum that's determined by how much cyberware you have in you. But effectively, it's possible, very, very distinctly possible, to bring someone back from cyberpsychosis and let them return to normal play. Sounds interesting, doesn't it? So, here we are, once again, with Changeling the Lost and Cyberpunk RED having 2 integrity systems that say, yeah, you can cross over into the abyss and be pulled back. But Changeling does something a lot more interesting. The player who has suffered this integrity loss, this abyss crossing, is able to participate in the acts that bring them back. Whereas in Cyberpunk, of course your GM could allow you to play your character, but per the rules as written, which is what we judge when we're talking about game design, they are no longer a PC character. They're the DM's character to do with as they please. So, you know, just another boss fight for the DM to go ahead and chuck at the players. And, well, this got me thinking. What the fuck is up with integrity systems as a fail state? They are a second health bar, and I mean, fuck it, when you think about other such games, I mean, I haven't read too deeply into Call of Cthulhu because, it's a big book, and I only have so much time, and I read a lot of big books for work, so that one just isn't high on my priority list. But I know for a fact that sanity exists, and 0 sanity is effectively character retirement, if not death. In fact, I think 0 sanity can drive you into a heart attack, if I'm remembering correctly. And also just certain amounts of sanity lost. Plenty of games have stress mechanics where, you hit your high stress and then you die. In fact, dipping into the world of video games, one of the most classic Lovecraftian examples of a stress mechanic rather than a sanity mechanic is Darkest Dungeon, where when a character reaches their maximum stress, they undergo a test that either makes them more helpful or more harmful to the party. And then furthermore, when they go ahead and reach their maximum stress a second time, they either have a chance to die of a heart attack or potentially endure and lose a little bit of stress. And then when you go ahead and send someone to be cured of that stress because you don't want them going into the next mission stressed out, that would be, you're risking more heart attack there, or at least faster heart attack. They just sometimes gain a new trait, but other times they just go back to how they were. They're the same person they were before they were stressed, and, that's at least, reasonable to a lot of people. Have you ever seen someone really stressed out freak the fuck out about something super inconsequential, and then they kind of like get their catharsis, calm the fuck down, and come back and they're like, wow, that was way out of proportion, and they're much more normal about it? Yeah, it happens. But, sometimes someone freaks out and they learn something from the experience and are changed. So it's not an unreasonable mechanic. It's, a game mechanic. It's not perfectly representative of real life, but it's at least a decent system for making characters feel human. Especially in a game where characters are disposable. But in tabletop RPGs, your character, hopefully, to you at least, unless you're playing some OSR games which probably won't have an integrity mechanic. Probably. Please don't cite the one OSR game that focuses on integrity over health at me. Like, I'm sure that's really cool and I'd love to read it, but, I mean, that's not what we're here to talk about. The integrity track is a health track that requires, at the best of times, roleplay. At the worst of times, XP costs to go ahead and modify. And, in fact, actually, when you look at it, yeah, a lot of the integrity tracks do just function off of XP costs, but not all of them. Once again, we're going to be looking at 4 examples here. In the case of Cyberpunk, it's actually a monetary cost. You pay money for therapy or to get your cyber uninstalled. Either way, therapy restores a certain amount of humanity to you based off a dice roll. You could get really lucky, you could get really unlucky, but that's just kind of therapy. Humanity in Vampire can explicitly be just purchased back with XP. Now, my GM typically requires that you roleplay being a nicer person to be able to justify getting this back, which is one of the reasons why some characters who are roleplaying their low humanity, drop to a low humanity and can never get it back even if they have the XP, and that's a conversation for another thing. But rules is written, you can just buy it back. There's no roleplay requirement. You don't have to be nice. You just dump XP into not dying, which, yeah, I can see why my GM has that, like, hey, maybe roleplay it a little bit rule, because frankly, that's really uninspired. Oh man, I'm getting really close to character retirement. Better put some XP into not having my character whisked away from me. Like, okay, cool. Yeah, great mechanic. Thanks, devs. And, not every mechanic can be a banger. I, of all people, realize this, but, they've done better. Fuck it. We'll toss in a 5th game. Limit is an integrity stat in most Exalted splat, or in several Exalted splats, but not all, or even possibly most of them, because Exalted are weird. Where something that stresses you out happens, or you go against your ideas or beliefs, and you start just potential rolling dice to see how many points of limit you gain. Unless you have a way to lose limit, which the only way off the top of my head I know of are certain charms for certain paired individuals. Basically, when you hit limit, you just kind of freak out and cause a bunch of trouble because you're a goddamn demigod who can, depending on your splat, destroy entire nations with a week preparation. Like, just a week. Just spend a week and, like, yeah, I wiped a small civilization off the face of the earth. Why? Because fuck them. That's something you can do as a fucking actual, like, spawning in character generation character. And then, you know, you get a little bit angry and your GM's like, well, I get to decide how you act while you're undergoing the, you know, your limit break. So, fuck it. You're just dropping a rock on these assholes. Meteor incoming. If I remember correctly, when it comes to dealing with quiet as a mage in Mage the Ascension, you can get it to go away similar to potential ways to get rid of Paradox, but don't quote me on that. Mage is very dense, and I've been reading it in chunks and pieces and flipping between different sections of the book to kind of just gather rules and lore as I go. But yeah, I think it is possible to lose quiet, but if you don't manage to perform the actions that pull that off, boom, Marauderdom. And of course, Changeling, it is very possible with just a little bit of roleplay, because again, Changeling is kind of the standard here, although not necessarily roleplay necessary, just actions you take, to get rid of clarity. Because what do you do to get rid of clarity? You go talk to something called a touchstone, which is a feature in the game that helps you deal with your integrity checks if you are at a level of integrity where you still are able to empathize with your touchstone, or it's called being an attached touchstone. You get a dice bonus to not suffering the negative impact of your clarity check. And I say dice bonus because in Changeling, if I remember correctly, it's actually when you roll clarity, if you succeed on a clarity check, you suffer clarity damage and roll for damage. It's like an attack. And so clarity attacks suffer a dice penalty, but we don't, again. That's just kind of mechanics. I'm just putting it out here because people might want to correct me or something, and please don't. That's not the point of this video. So, now that I've gone over a bunch of integrity mechanics, and people, I don't know, have hopefully been able to keep this as straight in my head as I'm able to from playing, like, 4 systems that have this, what I want to talk about is, frankly, how Changeling the Lost is more interesting in its integrity checks than these other games, and why these other games should look to Changeling the Lost and say, hey, yeah, you know, maybe there is a little something to that. So, first things first. When it comes to integrity, I think integrity 0 as a fail state is the most boring option. Now, I'm not saying that it shouldn't ever be a fail state. I agree with Changeling saying just straight up severe clarity damage is automatically a, like a death. Sure. It's really hard to take enough clarity to just be at full track in one, like, adventure, even in like one session. I suppose it's theoretically possible, especially if your GM is just chucking a bunch of shit at you that's designed to fuck you up. But again, that's more dealing with the GM and not rules as written in the way the dice work. The fact of the matter is, most of the time, if you're not likely to go from 0 to max severe clarity anytime soon. I believe your stats do influence your clarity, which means it can be higher or lower. And while we're at it, yes, you can probably make a character who somehow rules legal only has like 2 clarity. And yes, if you have a character who only has 2 clarity, yes, it's theoretically possible to, in one roll, even with only 1 die of damage, manage to pull off 4 damage of clarity and instantly kill your character. But, you know, you kind of built a mentally unstable character at that point. Clarity is effectively a form of sanity track. It's a little more complicated than that, but basically it's your ability to distinguish the mortal from the fey and the real from the fake. So, you know, if you built your character like that, and then you're like, bam, I died off of a really unlucky roll or interaction, well, frankly, you can do that with almost any of these. Or, well, not with any of these systems, but you can do that with Cyberpunk as well, and really, at that point, you should really look at how you're interacting with the game. Or if your GM is trying to kill you. One of the two. Admittedly, one of the things that's very different, or one of the things that is handled better than potentially being able to have a really low integrity, so that even when the extreme kill option comes up, it can come up really fucking fast. We actually can look at Mage and Vampire both and actually praise them. Vampire's humanity system, you by default, unless your GM lets you start at a lower or higher number for some reason, your character starts at 7 humanity. And, 7 is a pretty high humanity score. It's out of 10. That's a passing grade. Almost 75% of the way there. And you have a long way to fall, and each step of humanity in Vampire that you have to go down is different levels of this is going to be a fucking, like, how hard it is to get you down. At 1 humanity, it's a lot harder to lose that single humanity than it is to lose it at 7, 5, 10, or hell, even 2. It goes from committing a severe murder to mass murder. So, again, that does it. I will admit, humanity in Vampire has its roleplay place because you actually, most of the time, although not necessarily often, all the time, because certain ways that different mechanics in Vampire work that I don't want to get too deep in the weeds with, a vampire does have a safety net of it being harder and harder and harder to lose humanity. So unless you are playing a mass murdering psychopath from the start, you're probably not at a very high risk of dipping to 0 when you're at 1. And again, you start at a fixed amount of integrity, and it can go up or down based on your actions and your roleplay, in theory, kind of. Because, if you're doing the kind of things where you're losing the humanity at the step that you just spent XP on, you're just wasting XP. And I think giving, characters in a situation where they have something like Clarity, where it's not an instant jump into the abyss, jump into character death when they cross into that fail state, a fixed amount to start with, that's probably fine. And again, similarly, Cyberpunk, yeah, you can start with like a minimum of 20 humanity, cyber the fuck up, and on character generation start off 1 point away from Cyber Psycho if you have the right amount of money and make the wrong kind of choices. And then your GM can hit you with some really gnarly shit that makes you make a roll, fail the roll, lose humanity, and boom, you're Cyber Psycho. Because also humanity isn't just lost from installing cyberware, it's lost from, hey, you've seen some really horrible shit. It is effectively a trauma meter. A trauma ticks down your humanity meter. So, when looking at that, again, looking at both of these two systems, when looking at Changeling the Lost and at Cyberpunk RED, what you see is a system where if a player builds their character in just such a way, they can almost immediately hit a fail state due to bad luck. That's not fantastic. So fixed systems, I didn't even mention Mage. Mage, technically, you actually count your integrity up. You start at 0 and start gaining more as time goes on. So we look at that and we say, yeah, and also, arguably you tick up damage to Changeling or tick away health, however you want to do it, rather than ticking down like a vampire or a cyberpunk character. But up or down is really just semantics. You can add negative numbers or just choose to subtract. That's life. So, if I were to, take a look at these humanity systems or these integrity systems, I would make them start fixed at a fixed number. I'm not sure what the number is because, humanity is rated in the 10s in Cyberpunk because, honestly, it helps you slap more cyber into that body of yours, and it kind of makes the degradation just go slower. Whereas humanity is, and clarity is measured in the typically single digits, but can get to the double digits if you, build your character just so. And that character is, going to be a lot harder to really send into that abyss. So a fixed amount on a maximum scale that in theory can be role-played to gain or decrease, or maybe just a fixed number overall, would probably be quite a bit easier. Vampire, the main issue is, again, you can just spend XP. And, admittedly, part of the reason for this is that sometimes you're not actually a murderer. Sometimes it's the fact that you're a vampire that makes you a murderer, against your will. You could be the nicest person in the world, and then because you're a vampire, your vampireness just fucking murders a motherfucker. In fact, sometimes you can be required to risk losing humanity to stop murdering people. So you gotta murder a guy to murder fewer guys. Yes, this is an actual thing that can happen to you in game, and yes, I've had it done to me. The story's not important. But looking at that, an integrity system where circumstances beyond your control can tick you down kind of sucks, but it's also fundamental to Changeling. In fact, whether or not something is an action or is an accident or accidentally relates to whether or not you're taking a clarity check changes how bad the check you're taking is. So, and like I said, I like Changeling a lot for its clarity system. So maybe things being out of, and also, Cyberpunk. You're not normally looking for trauma if you walk down the back streets and see a bunch of, like dogs eating a person alive because people are starving and animals are too. Yeah, that's not great, but it's not like you went looking for that. Hopefully. So, actually, no, I would say that circumstances beyond your control, allowing your integrity to go down, is a good thing. And the reason I say this is because Mage the Ascension specifically, while yes, it is partially beyond your control, typically if you're suffering quiet in Mage, it's because you did something. Now, admittedly, that thing is normally just being a mage, but, you gotta have consequences for your actions somehow. So, yeah, fixed integrity system. And you know what? Thinking about it, we're gonna keep in the random shit can just fuck you up. But also, a little bit of sometimes the shit you do fucks you up too. Sometimes it really actually says something about a character, whether or not you made a choice. Sure, trauma can push someone over the edge, but so can installing Cyber, where the dice have the potential to drop you to 0 humanity, and you were like, nah, I bet that won't happen. I don't think this 4d6 dice roll will manage to pull off 12 and will therefore cause my character to sink into cyberpsychosis, and then, oh no, I rolled a 13. Sometimes you make a choice, and that's good. That says something about the character. And then, of course, we get to what I've already talked about not being my favorite thing. 0 integrity automatically means failure. Now, Changeling has like 3 integrity failure states, 2 of which are non-permanent retirement, and 1 of which is you're fucking dead. And that's not terrible, actually. In fact, I think that's really good. Because it does still make losing your integrity actually dangerous. And this is important. One of the things I said about integrity early on, it's a second health bar, but you can't necessarily just heal it by sitting around reading a book for a week. You have to do something about it. And that's important. That's very important. That's one of the fundamental things about this. You have to take actions to improve the health of your character. In Cyberpunk, you have to be willing to go to therapy. If you have a character who says, nah, therapy's for chumps, I'm not doing that, and they refuse to go, well, shit, they're basically asking for cyberpsychosis to come get them eventually. And, okay, admittedly, if you're a changeling, random shit can kind of just set you the fuck off based on your own trauma, because much like real-life trauma, sometimes reality is just a landmine waiting to hit you, where you're most vulnerable. And that kind of sucks. But normally, when you are not in the middle of some crazy changeling hijinks or horrible changeling misery, you probably have like a week or a couple of days to go out, spend time with the people, places, or things that make you feel connected to your humanity, and heal a little bit, get a little bit more grounded in a sense for what's real. And again, in Mage, I'm not gonna lie, I don't fully remember if it's even possible to get rid of quiet. I haven't read that far in the book yet, but if it's not, it should be. Even if the main, like, downfall of a mage is hubris, you should be able to fucking humble yourself and maybe not quite be so punished for all the things that are happening. And finally, like I said, the multiple tiers of how bad is the break. Yeah, you should have multiple tiers of, hey, how fucked are you when you do finally hit you've let this go on long enough that it's become a problem. It creates a cushion for not instant death. It theoretically, baked into these situations, should be a condition for instant death. In Changeling, as long as the player characters aren't repeatedly, like, kicked out of the dream and the Changeling isn't suffering any more, the coma patient isn't suffering any more clarity damage, which can totally happen in a dream, because just because you're in a dream doesn't mean that some of those triggers, like being told that your experiences are false, oh boy, because just to examine the coma mechanic a bit, to wake a Changeling up, you need to prove to them they are dreaming. This is most easily achievable by do something that makes the Changeling be like, huh, this isn't necessarily the way that things should work from my understanding. And then you roll, and when you roll, you theoretically get a number of successes towards the shared group roll of get the Changeling to personally internalize the idea, this is a dream, I need to wake up. And the reason why it's important that they personally internalize it is if you go up to a Changeling and yell, you're dreaming! Wake up, dumbass! That's going to hit a clarity check, because being told your experiences are false is a really bad clarity check. Like, it's one of the much harder hitting dice ones. And, being told that by a friend who you trust is also probably going to significantly add to that dice pool. So, yeah, the multiple tier fail state where you can probably shake yourself out of this. You're going to need help shaking it out of this, and you're fucked, you're gone, there's no saving you. There should be a built-in fail state for trying to save someone. But I mean, imagine if in Cyberpunk, instead of like, cool, well, your character is going to leave the group and is now a DMPC, and if the players ever figure out that they're cyber psycho, they can bring him back, and in the meantime, here's either an NPC to play or roll up a new character, and then if you do roll up a new character, well, now that your character is back and the party has managed to save him against the various odds, do you want to play your new or old character? That's kind of like, oh, fuck, that's a little rough. It might cause some groups or GMs to not try. But imagine being Cyber Psycho and being just aware enough that maybe, just maybe, with some rolls that you're taking. Like, the GM gets to give you impulses where you don't have control, but you do have just enough control of your character that maybe, with the right rolls and the right roleplay, you can realize that something is very wrong and do something about it. And kind of have that moment of, oh shit, I just, crawled back from the edge, didn't I? I was almost gone there, and everyone's like, yeah, don't do that again, dumbass. Like, that is much more of a story, especially if you have a character who's effectively addicted to cyber, because let me tell you, it happens, especially when people are like, oh god, I fucking love cyber. This is, on a fundamental level, definitely a more interesting story, and it also means that suddenly cyberpsychosis is not all or nothing. Like, true, as you become increasingly inhumane in your nature and lose touch with your humanity, you are suffering a penalty. A dice penalty. Or, sorry, not even a dice penalty, a point penalty to a stat. And yeah, you can hit 0 on that stat and still be a functional, playable character, because guess what? If the party solo who doesn't talk to people doesn't, just shoots when he's told to, guess what? The empathy penalty to all of those empathy stats, which a player can choose not to invest in anyways and have a low empathy at character generation, they don't care. Like, as a mechanical implication, as a player character, well, I wasn't the social player anyways. What do I care if I only have 1 empathy? hell, even if I roll a d10 and, I get to roll another d10, so I could potentially roll 21. And that's before you start taking in my points in the actual skill I'm rolling. That's just from my empathy and my d10 roll. So, it's not... saying it's not punishing enough feels a little mean, but effectively from a standpoint of, like, it doesn't make it seem bad to be at low empathy, and it's a very, like, viable playstyle. High max empathy characters who cyber up to the 9s and run around more metal than man are not uncommon in Cyberpunk builds. It's super doable. Now, also, you can avoid like 90% of the fucking cyber that's there with a bunch of non-humanity reducing equivalents because, frankly, cyber is a hell of a lot more flash than substance with a few notable exceptions. But also, yeah, native 2 empathy characters are super viable. So becoming a 2, 1, or even 0 empathy character is just as viable as long as you aren't rolling those skills or don't care about failing the checks. And sure, in theory, a GM should probably make someone care, but not everyone can do everything in Cyberpunk, so normally teams split up the responsibilities anyways, and that encourages players whose responsibility it isn't to just ignore it. So making cyberpsychosis progressive where it's like, hey, you start losing increasingly like noticeable amounts of control on your character, and it might cause some problems in roleplay, or even just maybe a few mechanical problems other than just a penalty to a role that a character who's suffering this may or may not care about, at least makes people more invested and maybe a little bit more hesitant to deal in something that they don't need. Cyber is just kind of like a very expensive deal with moderate benefits, mainly and most frequently, that you can't be disarmed. But I mean, hell, even for some of the most like cyberist tech, you can put it in a sleeve that you can wear on your arm or in a pair of fucking sunglasses. It's not the most intimate system, is probably what I would say. It's not bad, it's just not wowing me with the way it is. I really liked, however, reading it and finding out that, yeah, you can totally go cyber psycho. 1, that doesn't mean you're an immediate, like, monster killer, and 2, you can be saved. Both of those are cool, but, a character should have some control over that. They even a very significantly cyber psycho character who is completely lost to the GM, and at that point, like, the player should be able to roll to fight their cyberpsychosis and, make it easier for their team to notice that something is wrong, or even easier for their team to subdue them, so that they can get them to therapy, or a hospital, or whatever you need to do to unpsycho your cyber. And, again, it should also be a fail state, because, a lot of times, believe it or not, it's probably easier to kill a cyber psycho, despite how cybered up they are, than it is to just subdue them without rendering significant damage to their body that, you may not be able to afford the time on. And, again, frankly, oftentimes in lore, there are arguments to be made, especially looking at Ascension and Vampire the Requiem, that 0 integrity isn't actually a loss of a character's functionality. A vampire who hits 0 integrity is described as a draugr, and basically the idea is that they've completely given over to their vampire and are no longer a person. And that makes them bad and dangerous. However, there's also an entire group of vampires who basically go around living their lives at 0 humanity in a form of what's known as waking draugrdom. They're called Belial's Brood. And while the nature and origins of the Brood are a little bit vague, because that's how Vampire the Requiem just is with its lore, which I appreciate, effectively, there's nothing stopping someone who's hit 0 humanity from A, joining Belial's Brood, or B, being found and turned into a member of the Brood. And while it's fair to say that characters in that situation should become enemies, because Belial's Brood is, unless your GM is running a very specific game, a villain-only faction. I mean, and, vampires aren't exactly about having friends. So, your friends calling out to you so that you can come back towards the light is maybe a little not within the spirit of the game. You can be useful. And, in fact, useful enough to be a pain in the ass to replace. And in that situation, in theory, there should be methods for people to, at the very least, brainwash the living shit out of you into being a more functional person. It shouldn't necessarily be character retirement so much as just you now have to go on a quest to make sure that your, kind of sort of vampire ally isn't a burden on you anymore. And again, Mage the Ascension, the horrible impetus of this lovely video that you are all listening to. Well, the whole thing that got me thinking about this is Marauders. Marauderdom is explicitly a fail state. But the thing is, the way Marauders are described, they don't suffer the normal penalties from being from casting magic. In fact, they are actually a bubble of their own reality that is forcibly overriding reality, which is more power than a mage is normally able to exert. And when they do suffer backlash for this, it doesn't hit them personally, they externalize it onto the people around them. Mages can't do that. Marauders can. That sounds like a level of power that is, frankly, beyond what most mages are capable of. And while it is inflicted by this same backlash that mages get for doing things a little bit too obvious, the fact that too much backlash causes a mage to just fucking start fighting reality, I don't know. It seemed to me a little conspiratorial. Like, perhaps it was a step in the wrong direction for this Ascension thing. Especially since reality can open up and, fucking eat a goddamn marauder and just force them out of it. Where do they go? Nobody knows. Maybe hell, maybe heaven, maybe somewhere completely outside of reality. Maybe they just go to fucking Chronicles of Darkness. Maybe they go into a completely different game line. It's a complete and utter mystery what happens to a marauder when they are forced out of reality. But the idea that I'm going to stop you from using your abilities by making your abilities inflict, all of your will into a complete and utterly, detached from reality bubble on reality, that doesn't sound like success from Paradox trying to imprison you. That sounds like you've hit a level of power where you're starting to actually force your will to externalize on reality in a way it can't stop. And to me, that sounded like Ascension. I mean, some people said that, hey, I don't think that can be Ascension because, one, it's a fail state, and like I said before, a fail state being the success state is not narratively satisfying for the game. So, which isn't an argument against my belief, but it is a good explanation as to why GM and storytellers shouldn't lean into that. But also, another person said, I don't like that idea because things happen to a mage when they are a marauder that they would never want to happen to them. But also, in Chronicles of Darkness, in World of Darkness lore, we see multiple people achieve quote-unquote win states that they don't want. Their victory makes them miserable. So, there is narrative, textual evidence that Marauderdom is one of the final potential steps before Ascension. Especially since Ascension is really badly defined. In fact, it's not defined at all. It's so ill-defined that one of the people who I shared this theory with said, "That's a really funny take. I think Ascension isn't real and is a lie spread by a different villain faction to cause mages to kill each other." Which, frankly, yeah, I can see that. So, what if you could achieve, you can overcome other forms of quiet. And there's something similar to quiet in Mage the Ascension that or at least very different sources, very different intentions, but narratively the way they're talked about in 20th anniversary editions, somewhat similar events. So an event's very similar to Quiet. Quiet is reality has said, "Fuck you, asshole! Stop messing with me. You're being too obvious. I'm going to lock you in prison and punish you in some way." Comparatively, one of the things mages can undergo is called the Seeking. And in some situations, Quiets and Seekings look very similar. Sometimes a Quiet will trap you in a prison or lock you in a deep sleep where you have to do something. It might be individual for each mage or nobody knows what, but you're on a quest to basically re-unlock your power and wake up. Similarly, when you start to hit a point where you have managed to gain enough power and you've stalled and you need to go to the next quest, the thing that makes you a mage may very well lock you into a Seeking where you go into a deep meditation, sleep, or coma, and then may return in days, weeks, months, years, or never, very similar to some of the prisons Quiet can put you in. The main difference is that, as far as I know, there's no textual evidence to support that there's a Seeking that can give you power on par with just creating your own personal reality bubble as a Marauder. And even then, there are definitely in lore mages who have been implied to be either attempting to achieve that or actually pulling it off. And in fact, there is a being that's not a mage in World of Darkness lore who just kind of low-key can just make reality or illusions real. His name's Ravnos. I don't know much about him. We're not talking about fucking lore here. This is a design video. But, you know, looking at this, there are similarities in these things. So what if Quiet was a quest? What if achieving unity with the infinite, which is an arguable definition of Ascension because the infinite is theorized to be one of the fundamental aspects of magic. It's complicated and, like I said, deeply metaphysical and philosophical and not necessarily very important. It's kind of a there's so much here it's probably nothing deal, but, you know, whatever. It's part of the philosophy of the game. But, you know, what if Marauderdom was not necessarily the necessary final step, but a potential final step of you've just pushed so far beyond the limits of what should be possible that you start to see how you can achieve the impossible, and then you have to fight your way back from that while literally everybody else who knows about you is trying desperately to fucking murder your ass. And also, you know, if you achieve it, maybe reality pops you out and you ascend, or maybe you become something else and ascend. But, you know, if this was mechanically designed differently and more like Changeling, Seeking sound almost like a Changeling the Lost Coma. It's a quest you go on that you may never come out of to gain more power. So, what if one of the final steps, or what if achieving Marauderdom caused you and your group to go on a form of, you know, group seeking where you're just an insane bastard and they need to basically pull you through the insanity, not back to reality, but to the other side, a side they can't imagine, while, you know, fending off a bunch of threats. And that was a final thing you did. Mechanically, what if that was a possibility? There are plenty of games which feature character retirement, which, you know, it's not a bad thing. Sure, it could be the end of the story, but fuck it. Apocalypse World says, hey, you've leveled up a certain number of times. Do you just want to give up your character and play a new one? Or play a second character at the same time? There are games out here that say retiring a character isn't necessarily a bad thing. Sometimes the end of one person's story isn't the end to a group story, and there are plenty of ways to make Marauderdom into Ascension seem either way too hard for people to want to attempt if someone achieves it, or way too dangerous so that they would never want it to happen. Looking at these integrity systems today, I think the best form of an integrity system is one that has fail states, but before that, you get negative states that people can be pulled out of, either on their own or with help all the time, or, you know, maybe not. I think it's something where you should start at a fixed amount of integrity, and then, admittedly, sometimes the narrative of your game has to determine how much there is there. There's almost 20 for mages of quiet to get before you hit Marauder. There's a maximum of 80 humanity possible for a Cyberpunk. You have a maximum of 10 for vampires, and I don't know the clarity calculation off the top of my head for changelings, but it's probably also 10. Looking at a game where you have someone have a lifeline of, hey, how close to the end are you, where you either need to take specific actions or have it be difficult to heal so that more than just the physical wounds someone suffers, indicates their health, is a good thing. It should just be that it should just be a situation where 0 is, not an automatic end and very little or nothing happens before that. It should be a tiered thing where you can interact with it and come away either, potentially once you get healed, significantly stronger and more enlightened, or, just worse for wear or scared. It should be a vehicle for change. A way to gaze into the abyss and scramble back afraid, or dive in and hope for the best. Because from a narrative perspective, that makes all of these games, at least in my opinion, more interesting, rather than just another you hit 0 HP, you die. There are steps along the way. Cyberpunk has multiple wound states that change how hard it is to heal. It has that in its health. Why not in its humanity system? Changeling has it in its clarity system. Vampire doesn't, and Mage definitely has tiered penalties that you start suffering as you get more quiet, but hey, when you cross into the true abyss, why, there has to be an end somewhere. But maybe don't make it one of the more mysterious and narratively interesting things. Maybe there should be a way to be a marauder and pull through, or be a marauder and just fail and die, other than people decapitating you. So, anyways, this has been long and a little rambling because I still don't script my videos, but hopefully if you've listened to this, you've thought about, hopefully gained an interest in any of these games. I very much like Vampire the Requiem. Mage the Ascension, I haven't played it or run it yet, but reading through it, it seems super fucking cool. And it was sold to me by people saying, yeah, sure you roll dice, but also sometimes you have to get into a philosophy argument with your storyteller. And I was like, fuck it, I want people to bring their goddamn dissertation to me and I'll fucking yell at them about it. That sounds fun. Changeling is... I've had multiple people tell me that Changeling is one of the best ways to get people involved in either Chronicles or World of Darkness with both Changeling games, because they're so unique and different and are a good way to bring people to terms with the mechanics. And Cyberpunk RED is really fun. It's not necessarily as serious as Shadowrun, and if you really like Shadowrun, that may not appeal to you. But if you want something where it's all about style over substance and just trying to be as cool as you fucking can, Cyberpunk's fun. Cyberpunk is fun. And also, if you're designing your own game and you're looking at some kind of, secondary health track that's meant to be a little bit slower to gain and more narratively difficult to heal, maybe you'll think about having people cross into the abyss and being able to be pulled back and have that be an experience that has a noteworthy impact on the characters at hand. Anyways, I hope that this video has at least been interesting to listen to me, lose my sanity as Mage drives me towards conspiracy theories and design thoughts at the same time in opposite directions. I'm Oscar C. Tango, and thank you very much for listening.